So hi, it's Helen here and Janet, just doing a quick sound check. If you could please pop something into the question box to let us know you can hear us okay, that would be wonderful. So hello and welcome to today's CPD session. We're going to be reviewing the Education and Childcare Technical Qualification. As we've said, please let us know you can hear us okay by putting something into the question box for us if you haven't already done so. This session will last approximately 1 hour and it'll include a range of interactive activities. If you've got access to a smartphone or tablet with a camera, please have it to hand to allow you to use it. If you don't have access, please don't worry, we'll also be sharing access the activities and contribute to them too. So my name's Helen Scanlon and I've been supporting our education childcare provider since May 2020. The provider development team focus on developing teaching and learning best practice, which underpins NCFE's main purpose, and that's to promote and advance learning to help to create a fairer, more inclusive society. We do encourage questions, so please use the question box to ask us any questions related to today's session topic. And if you haven't already done so, as I say, please pop something into the question box and let us know you can hear us okay. So we're joined today by Janet King, and Janet is the Sector Manager for Education and Childcare at NCFE. Hi, Janet.
Hi, thank you, Helen. Hello, everyone. Really looking forward to the webinar. Always brilliant to be part of these. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks a lot, Janet. You can see the objectives for today's session on the screen now. So many thanks for attending today. We're planning to share some of our ideas, but it's also extremely important that we facilitate peer learning too. So we do encourage you to contribute. Please be ready to share your own ideas, strategies, and examples in today's session. Okay, we're going to start off today with a Slido activity. I'm going to pop the QR code up on the screen. What we're going to be asking you is to give us one word to describe the first 2 years, or 1 year if you're just in your first year still, of delivery of the childcare, education childcare T level. As I say, I'm going to pop the Slido link into the chat box as well. So you can either scan that code with a smartphone that I spoke about earlier, or you can click on the link and we're asking for one word from yourselves, please, to describe the first year or 2 years of delivery in your education and childcare T level. So that word, it's a word cloud poll, should be open for you now. So lovely, the words are coming in thick and fast now. Once we've got all the words, I will share the screen so everyone can see what everyone's said. I'll just give you a few minutes just to share some of your words to describe your TQ and overall T level, of course, experience. Yeah, go to a webinar. I'm just checking out the questions that have come in so far. I know I've been asked by Molly, thank you. Can we unmute yourselves when sharing? No, we need everybody to put things into the chat. There's going to be too many people on the call today to have all of the mics turned off. So go to a webinar does have them turned off automatically. We will be interacting during the session using we've got a Menti, a Slido, and a Jamboard as well. So we're asking everyone to use the chat question box or give us their input via the different interactive activities we're going to be using. So far the words we've got are challenging, which is understandable, and great. It's got some good votes. What we'll do is I'm going to share our words and we'll talk you through our experiences. When I say ours, Janet's and I's experience of working with you wonderful people. And if anything comes to mind as we talk, please do pop it into the question box or onto the Slido. So we'll share some of our words, and we'd like to pick out a few of them to provide a bit more detail. It looks like we're on a similar wavelength, highlighting the challenges that teaching the TQ has presented, but we should also remember how well the industry and universities have responded to the new T-levels. So a couple from this list I'd like to highlight. Number 8, having the freedom to teach the core and the specialist knowledge in the way that suits your own organisation and your students. So having flexibility in relation to how you facilitate learning and assess the progress. And although I'm aware that this was scary and new for some staff, some found it invigorating, refreshing and even stimulating. So there's been a lot of freedom in how you've taught and formatively assessed the qualification. Another one for me is number 11, and that's academic. In my experience, teaching the T-level as an academic or technical vocational qualification has been more successful, rather than seeing it as a vocational A-level. It's not. The inclusion of the extended industry placement and focus on work-related employability skills in the sector does raise the standard, and it raises the standard required to pass the TQ, a massive difference to the knowledge and understanding only focus of A-levels. So my advice would be to keep this in mind when planning your future TQ delivery and curriculum. So I'm going to ask Janet to come in here to share some of her words now.
Some brilliant words there, Helen. I think if I was adding anything, one of the words that I would add would probably be exciting, because it's new. It does bring that feeling of anticipation. It's pioneering and forward thinking, and these are exciting features of exciting times in education. So I think the T-levels have been described as a skills revolution, and so it's an exciting part. I'm going to keep on to that keyword of educational history. I think I'd also add that T-levels are up-to-date, responsive and reflective of the workforce. My favourite word, I think, and the favourite word that I would choose most of all is professional. It's a qualification of quality. It's highly reputable, and it's going to be one that's valued by the sector and for further study alike. So I love the idea of welcoming a new wave of professional qualification. Thanks, Helen.
Great. So we have been on a journey, and as this image represents, it's been a bit of a climb, and maybe it's not as straightforward or direct as that we would have preferred or liked. There have been many successes along the way, starting a new program with new core content and new assessment activities, and the demanding placement requirement has been a challenge, and that's without even considering the impact of the global pandemic. We've been so impressed with the hard work, tenacity, adaptability and innovative practice we've seen and heard about, whilst maintaining the high standards and expectations of the sector. I know I've said this along the way in many consultations, but I'm going to say it again. It's a massive thank you from everyone at NCFE for your hard work and commitment as we've worked with you on this journey. You've been amazing. Your professionalism and positive attitude has to be commended. And then Janet, I'm going to bring in your subject specialist comments here as well, please.
Yeah, absolutely, Helen. I mean, we need to thank providers and students too. The qualification has been brought alive, the words in a specification, the deeper meaning behind that, the passion of the teaching and learning that's actually going to evoke change for the people that matter, for the children, young people and families that this qualification and the learning from this qualification will touch. You've helped to make it something we can all be very proud of. So a great big massive thank you from me too. Thanks, Helen.
Lovely, thanks a lot, Janet. So the next slide, we're going to go to Jamboard because we'd really like your input again, please. And before we share some of our ideas, what would be your top tips for success in the management of the teaching and learning activities for the education and childcare TQ? So as I said, we're going to use Jamboard for this. We're going to use the sticky note option. We have the link on the screen now and on in the chat box. And we would ask you to use the Jamboard sticky note bit for sharing your ideas. If you have any difficulty in doing this, please put your ideas into the question box and then we can share them. So I'm going to go to the Jamboard now and ask you to do the sticky note to show what your top tips would be. So I'm just going to bring that over to the screen to share. So I'll just demo what you do here. I've put one on there to get us going. Top tips for starting next year or starting year one. In the sticky note bit sections here, if you click on that, you get an option for your colour. You put your idea on. So a top tip might be to plan placement activities carefully. I'm just going to pop that in. If I can type it correctly. And then if you click save, it pops that onto there and you'll need to cancel that to come out of it. So you have your sticky note on there. Janet, if you'd like to add your sticky notes, you absolutely could. These are anonymous. You can see that people logging in are called different animals. We've got an anonymous skunk, camel, etc. I'm not going to name the animals that I can't pronounce. But yeah, what would be your top tip for other providers in relation to what you would suggest they do in planning the teaching and learning activities, planning the curriculum for next year? We've just finished, well, we're nearly finished the first year, and we're just about finished the second year for our different 2020 and 2021 starts. But what have you learned, and what would you suggest to other people to do to get ready for next year? So thank you. You can see they're starting to come on now. I'm just going to move them around as they come in. So there's a really good idea, starting the employer set project preparation earlier. Janet, have you any comments on the ESP prep?
Always got comments on ESP. I think I'd consider those reflective opportunities that combine exam questioning and group discussion, feedback, giving and receiving feedback. All of these are parts of the opportunities that make up the ESP. So preparing for examination, reflecting on elements and combining knowledge and understanding of several elements to develop those skills of analysis and evaluation. That might benefit from, a greater holistic exploration. But I think with the ESP and the examination, if we're thinking about the core at the moment, when we're starting that year one, I'd think let's make sure we are feeling very comfortable with what the specification, what the syllabus is asking of us as teachers and deliverers in terms of that core content. And then also about thinking, okay, we understand the content. Let's think how this is being assessed and how can we develop the strategies for confidence in those different forms of assessment and bring that forward. And I think sometimes and I'd be guilty of this, I think, sort of thinking, right, okay, it's examination. We're okay with a scenario. We're okay with an employer set project. Let's have a look at the examination. And I'd be tempted to say we need to judge them and see them as two different beasts, if you like. So we know what an exam looks and feels like, given the preparation and the familiarity, absolutely. But really engaging with what the assessment is requiring from the ESP would be my thing, and looking at all those different stages within it. The feedback, the discussion, the fact that they're going to be recorded, all of those things I think are skills that can be honed and experiences that can become more familiar, because at the end of the day, that's what we want, that student to feel comfortable and not be shocked by what they actually find during their assessment. I
Thanks,
rambled
Janet. I'm
on
going to
there,
leave.
Helen.
No, that was absolutely fine. I'm going to leave that open just as people, if anything resonates that we say today or anything pops into your head, as I say, I'm going to leave that open so you can come back to it if you'd like to add to it later. Okay, so we're going to share some of our top tips with you based on our review of the teaching and learning of the programme, the things that we've witnessed in our contact with yourselves, with providers. So firstly, ensure that your initial advice and guidance is detailed to help ensure that the right students are on the right course. Consider setting entry requirements which match the challenge of the TQ of the programme, especially considering the maths, English, digital, analytical and employability skills that your students are going to need for success. So moving on from IAG, also ensure that your initial and diagnostic activities are thorough enough to confirm that the students are ready for the challenge of the T-level programme. And then once you've got your starting points identified, plan in regular formative assessment activities which track the students' progress. Consider having set milestones during each section of the 2 years with expected progress at certain points identified to ensure that students are making progress. And another recommendation is to involve the students as much as you can in the teaching, learning and assessment activities. So think about developing their metacognition, their analytical and reflective skills, and using teaching and learning activities which fully submerge the students into the how and to the why of their learning. I'm going to ask Janet to talk about this next one, please.
Yes, those opportunities for reflection. I think, as I said before, it's really important as the students are beginning to form an understanding and an appreciation of the content, element by element or theme by theme, where they're bringing that learning together through consolidation. Reflection will really help with that. So thinking about what they're learning from a formative assessment point of view by maybe reviewing and evaluating elements if they're looking at it like that, but then also using that understanding for sort of consolidation of other elements and bringing holistic opportunities for learning together. And that will help, as I said before, with that deeper engagement with analysis and evaluation. So reflecting on placement, if we've got early years students and they're in their placements, let's reflect on that in the context of the elements, but let's also use that reflection as part of formative assessment and preparation for that journey. And at the end of the day, we want that well-rounded student who's able to be work ready in terms of education and childcare. So they need to be able to see how all these different elements impact and work together holistically. So using that knowledge, combining that knowledge and continually reflecting on that with good examples from practice. Reflection is key really to that awareness and understanding of student capability.
Absolutely, and as well, the students are going to be reflective practitioners in the industry as well, so it's really good to embed that into what they're going to be doing in the future. Okay,
Absolutely.
brilliant. So we've got our first Chief Examiner's report from the Autumn 2021 series. If you haven't seen it yet, you'll find it in the documents in the assessment section of the qualifications QualHub page. You would scroll down and see the documents that you can see on the screen now in that screenshot. And to access them, you'll need to use your portal login, just as you would for the Education Childcare resources. So Janet and I have done a bit of a deep dive into the report, and we're going to share our findings and review from it. And hopefully it will help to inform your future curriculum planning. As we run through this review, please make a note of any point we make which you agree with or should consider in your own review, or if you have any questions on them, and that will all hopefully inform your future teaching and learning practice. So we're going to look at the exams first. So these are the resits that were sat by students in the autumn window, which was November, December last year. So students that had completed the first year in 2020 to 21, but then resat the exams and the ESP in the autumn series, either to get that pass grade or to improve a grade. Technical language, first of all, we'll just get everything up first. Good practice was identified in the report when students used the technical language correctly and confidently. So students achieving higher marks did this really well in the exams. Their written communication was clearly expressed and well structured. Most students attempted all the questions, but some failed to attempt all of them. This applied to both the short answer questions and the extended answer questions, but not so much for the multiple choice ones. It would therefore be recommended to encourage your students to attempt all the exam questions, even in the form of notes or bullet points if they have time concerns. A few students crossed out work which was accurate, so it would be advisable to remind students that where work is crossed out, it may not be marked. The report also identified that additional marks were gained by students who showed their breadth and depth of understanding and made use of supportive examples. So also higher marks were gained where the students focused on all the components of the question. So encouraging them to read and respond fully to each part of the question is advised. So the question might have 2 or 3 parts. And what they found from the autumn results was that some students had addressed maybe 1 or 2 of them and not all. And linked to that previous point, few students referred to practice in their answers. And this might be possibly due to the impact of COVID on their placements, preventing the opportunity for students to gain valuable industry experience that they could then use in their exams. However, it was evident that some students did use their own experiences when responding to some of the questions, so this should be encouraged. From a teaching and learning perspective, practice in doing this will help the students to apply that skill in the exams and also make the theory and core come to life and make more sense to the students. And for general exam experience, the lack of recent examination experience and relevant examination preparation may have been a factor in students understanding the importance, for example, of attempting all the questions and staying focused on answering the question posed, not the question that they think was posed. And we therefore encourage and provide us to continue to work with our students on exam techniques and strategies to avoid them losing marks for this reason. So we've also included the raw mark grade boundaries. This information was provided or is provided in this Chief Examiner's report, and it might be helpful to act as a guide for yourselves to help with the assessment and grading of your current students, ongoing formative assessment to make sure they're on track where they're at. As I say, these are notional boundaries and they are raw mark grade boundaries. Janet, is anything general you want to add before I move on to specifics?
I think you've covered the main things. I think the one thing that I would emphasize is the fact that, yes, there's been that sort of limited placement opportunity, and that speaks for itself, how much, that side of things is valued in terms of bringing this into that cohesive theoretical and practical sort of positioning. And that's been unavoidable. So there we are. But also, I think what's important is encouraging students to not be put off if they don't feel, oh, this is a question that's asking me to analyze or evaluate, but actually, okay, let's have a strategy for this. Let's start with what is this question asking? So we even start by by identifying some of those key words and maybe thinking of a definition or giving some explanation. And so we might not analyze, we might not evaluate, but we should pick up some points along the way when we're attempting those questions by working our way through perhaps strategy, so preparation for exam question techniques. Thanks, Helen.
Okay, so the feedback and suggestions for each of the exam sections is coming up next. We'd just like to do a quick reminder for you to put any questions you have into the question box for us. And these are specifics to the autumn 2021 papers, but there's lessons learned that we can pick up from the specifics that the Chief Examiner pulled out. So for core paper A, you can see on the screen now the feedback on section A. A general exam technique issue seems to be present here. When asked specifically about Skinner, for example, students demonstrated a basic understanding but didn't all focus on answering the question. It's good to see that they brought in other theorists. Hopefully this was to analyse the different learning theories, but higher marks were gained when students focus on responding to all of the bullet point lists in that question that was from August. As I say, the August paper is now available as a sample on QualHub. And then for question B, or section B, sorry, the students generally provided accurate answers, but they lacked depth and breadth. It's good to use the wording of the question in their response, but students would benefit from practicing doing this and not spending too much time simply rewriting the question, and focus on responding to the question. It does look like they would benefit from making stronger links between the points they make and how they relate to the relevant theories, regulations, policies and principles, ensuring that they can analyse and justify the points they make. So moving on to section C, which was about behaviour. The first point relates specifically to impulse control, and this is included in core elements 4 and 11. Again, the depth of understanding was limited here, but generally the answers for this section were accurate and focused, so that's great. A comment is made related to students not always suggesting age-related responses to age-related questions. So this could be an area which could be highlighted to embed and promote through curriculum delivery for your future cohorts. And then in section D, students did well. Working with others, families and other professionals was an area of strength. And also students did well with the maths question too. It was highlighted here that they were able to apply their understanding by clearly showing how they'd worked out their answer, and that's specific to maths. Janet, anything you want to add to anything I've just said there?
Thanks, Helen. It's really reassuring when I look at some of these things here. I think what you mentioned around behaviour for section C, on some occasions where questions had an age-related scenario, students didn't always use age-appropriate responses, and I think that could well be that students are coming on with a sort of early years focus or an assisting teaching focus, for example, and they're going into that sort of stressful exam situation and thinking perhaps, okay, I'm an early years student, I'm an assisting teaching student, and it could well be that we need to remind students that exam is looking at the 0 to 19. So let's really look at that question. Let's read that question. And is this actually something that's applying to children and young people rather than children within the early years specifically? So again, strategies to make sure and to remind students about the core and about the range of the core, that might help with something like that, because I can imagine that was something like that threw students off course there.
That makes sense, Janet, because people will be quite rightly contextualising the core input. Unfortunately,
Exactly.
the core is for across all the specialisms. So yeah, students will need to be reminded that the core is not necessarily focusing on their specialist area. Lovely. Okay, we're going to move on to the report for core paper B. As I say, I keep checking the question box. If you have anything that comes up, please remember to pop it in for us. So starting with section A, the report shows that there was a general accurate response to the area of child development. There is acknowledgement of how the term attachment distracted some students. So teaching of terms which have multiple meanings or connotations might also be useful to keep in mind. Also, the question related to Selman's 5-level framework, and this proved to be a challenge for most students. And there was also a tendency for some to concentrate on basic activities rather than strategies, something that could be explored in teaching and learning activities across all the core competencies. And then moving on to section B, here most students demonstrated a good understanding. The difference between identifying policies and the procedures within them might also be useful to embed into future learning activities. So the difference between the policy and the procedure within them. And then the final two sections of the report focus on equality and diversity, SEND, and English as an additional language. And then for section C, there's a mixture of points made here. Generally, it would seem that an appropriate level of E&D was evident in the students' responses. However, some questions seem to have been challenging, confusing applying their answer to their practice rather than focusing on how the Equality Act underpins policies and procedures. The other missed opportunity was not using the provided age range in one of the questions to provide a bit more depth in their answer. And then finally for section D, with my literacy head on, it's always going to happen. I can't move on without commenting on the incorrect use of the possessive apostrophe and a plural noun here. Sorry. I also couldn't miss the opportunity to include promotion of accurate punctuation and how it impacts on reading and understanding of a sentence. Anyway, it's great to see that the students' understanding of SEND and EAL was demonstrated, but it also highlights an issue related to them confusing acts and policies. And finally, some students only responded to the first part of one of the questions, 20B, identifying the strategies but not the impact they could or would have on participation. So please consider how the findings of these reports could inform future teaching practice and also revision and exam readiness activities for the next series coming up in June. Janet, I'm going to ask you to come in again and anything I've missed particularly, please.
Thanks, Helen. I mean, it is, as you say, it's reassuring, but with such expert teaching, it's expected that there is a sound understanding of subject areas such as SEND and an appreciation of English as an additional language that we're looking at on this particular slide, for example. I think it is challenging for students, for anybody often, to see the connections between legislation, policy and procedure, and examples that spotlight specific aspects of a particular act, followed by an identification of a policy and then a procedural function can really help, you know. So, for example, let's have a look at the Health and Safety Act 1974. What policies come out of that? So the health and safety policy within a setting, and then an example of a procedure may well be a risk assessment procedure, or the different forms that people may have to complete if there's an accident or an incident and so on. And I can remember, I mean, I'm happy to share, if there's time, Helen, I can share one of the things that we did within the classroom that I'll always remember, because it was a bit of a challenging area. It's not the easiest thing to teach. Is there time just to give that example?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll go for it. Okay, so what we did, and I can remember this and thinking, is this going to work? I'm not quite sure. But what we did, we actually around the room we put some different pieces of legislation that we've been looking at. So it could be, you know, the Equality Act, it could be health and safety, and so on. And these different acts were around the room, and then the students would have already pre-prepared what had been done for the lesson were different policies, and then they'd look for the policy that best aligned to a particular piece of legislation, and they'd go around the room and they'd blue tack these things on, and they then create policies that lived within the act, or so they believed. And then what they would do is actually go to a different section, and they'd have some pre-prepared procedures such as risk assessment procedure, accident forms, you know, confidentiality clauses, this sort of thing. So different procedures and things that they would actually follow, and they'd put those where they wanted. And then they would try and weave through, literally weave through. This was done with wool, so it was almost like the Crystal Maze, you know, it was like something off Mission Impossible. But they would weave with the wool or the string or whatever these policies and procedures together to show an overlap in practice of, well, in placement I've seen a risk assessment for health and safety, but I've also seen that being applied in a different context. And they would weave these things together to show how everything worked well. So it was one way of saying, you know, we do the things that we do because we follow a policy, and that policy is reflecting the standards and maintaining the standards that have been set in legislation. So it's really important that we know that legislation sort of is the foundation for policy development, and policy development is broken up into sort of that day-to-day practice. And then students would ask, you know, or I would ask students, and they would give examples of how they'd seen different things within their day-to-day practice, and we'd decide as a group, okay, so where's that going? Which piece of legislation did that come from? And there was a bit of fun going on where people were sort of debating where it should be anchored. So things like that. I don't know if anybody's got any other sort of, I mean, it was good for us because it was fun, but it also got students moving around and doing something different than maybe researching a policy or reading through a policy that they might have done in the class previously. So I don't know if anybody else has got what we could say is as an innovative approach to legislation, policy and procedure. It's not the easiest thing to teach and the easiest connection to make, but if you've got some ideas, it would be wonderful to hear or see some of those in the chat, and we could read through them perhaps, Helen, if there's time. I'm taking over now, if there's time.
Absolutely, Janet. If anybody has any ideas, I am keeping an eye on the question box, so please do share ideas. Absolutely. Thank you, Janet. We're going to look at the ESP next, and as I say, we're aware that this is a brand new assessment method and that centres had many questions related to the management and delivery of it. So now we've been through the process of completing this in its entirety, we will look at the examiner's report and summarise the lessons learnt so far. Just a reminder though, anything we talk about, please make any notes, record any points that you agree with or disagree with, or maybe should consider for your own students, and reflect on each of the points we make to assess their relevance to and impact on your own programme review and your own curriculum planning. Okay, we've started off by including the raw mark grade boundaries as a guide to inform a best guess for predicted or expected grades for students as they're working towards these. So firstly, we should remember the purpose of the Employer Set project as being to allow the students to apply their core knowledge and skills so as to a substantial piece of work in response to an employer set brief. So students demonstrated a good understanding of what is expected for the assessment, and there were some very good responses seen, which demonstrates that students had a clear understanding of the project brief, were able to apply this appropriately to the various tasks included in the assessment. The report recommended that students should be made aware of how the assessment objectives are implemented in marking the project, so that they'll understand the level of performance that will achieve high marks. Students awarded higher marks applied their knowledge and understanding to the assessment criteria and wrote coherently, with both depth and detail in their responses to the brief. Some students lacked precision in their responses or produced responses that lacked depth in terms of demonstrating the core skills, and in turn, this limited the marks awarded. And something that seems to be really simple would be to ensure that the students clearly label each of their tasks and they're linked to which tasks and which piece of evidence is for each piece of work. If the students clearly label their work with the relevant task number, they minimise the chances that the examiner or marker is given credit for the appropriate task. If they don't label them, there's the possibility that the examiner or marker won't link the right piece of work to the right task. It's also recommended in the report that students should understand the relationship between the assessment criteria, for example, in the pre-release activity, doing their own research notes or using their own research notes to support their own ideas and opinions throughout the task, and keeping the notes related to how they approach the tasks, which then also help them to effectively respond to the final reflection task. So to summarise, overall, students' work showed that they were well prepared for the assessment tasks. They should be reminded that they should demonstrate the 4 core skills, how they would plan to communicate information effectively, and that the communication skills used for instructions are age and stage appropriate. Planning and collaboration with other relevant professionals and partnership working is also important. Jonathan, I'm going to bring you at the end of talking through all the tasks rather than ask you to come in each time.
Okay.
So we're now going to look at what the report said about each of the ESP tasks separately. So for task 1, parts A and B, the students use the information in the project brief effectively to produce their early support and activity plans. Positive points in the report include when students demonstrated a sound understanding of the theoretical and philosophical approaches and made references to educational theories, concepts and pedagogy. So they brought in theory here that underpinned their plan, their ideas. So it's useful to see the detail related to maths, English and digital skills here. Strengths identified for each area include maths, and that was using, interpreting and processing data. For digital, it was creating word processed documents. And for English, it was showing confident application of written skills and some excellent use of technical language and terminology. However, some SPAG errors were observed. So more careful proofreading was recommended. I'm going to also quickly put my literacy hat on here. As I know, many of you think that if they're using a word processing program, then the spell checker would do it for them, but it doesn't because it needs to be switched off. So as they're practicing for these tasks, encourage the students to proofread their work as they go so that they will spot them. Because when it comes to the real life ASP, they have to have the spell and grammar checker deactivated. So moving on to task 2, the summary here includes a recommendation that students should ensure that they redraft their plan based on the peer feedback and suggestions. So as Janet said earlier, practice giving feedback to each other and how to use the feedback effectively is going to be useful for the students here. Reflection and evaluation is also important. And as Janet said, these are skills they're going to be expected to use in the studies and in the industry. The report also suggests that students should be encouraged to make links to the changes they make back to the feedback that led to these changes, justifying their responses. This might mean that feedback from the peers was taken on board, but not used. It was considered, but not used, or that some of their peers' ideas have been used or adapted. As long as there are justifications for these, then reflective practice will be evident. Finally, please encourage the students to ensure that changes and plan content match the peer discussions and the activity plan's objectives. Okay, moving on, task 3 next. As you'll see in this section, the students' verbal communication skills are important here, just as they are in industry. I'm going to pause just for a minute to allow you to read that text. I see that some questions have started to come in, so when I finish this bit, we will come to them and address them. So for task 3, again, practice in the discussion task is recommended here to overcome nerves. Although in the live assessment task completion, we can't stop the students being nervous. It's completely natural and understandable. So some incorrect or limited responses were provided. And an approach to overcome this would be to allow the students to ask if the question could be reworded if they don't fully understand it. This is something teachers could practice with the students in advance. And finally, recording this task was highlighted as being a challenge. So please ensure that your centre can do this confidently, whether it's yourselves as teachers and lecturers or the exams department recording it for you. You need to make sure that it's done confidently, and everybody, the relevant staff doing this, do get to practice this in advance of the live task. And then finally, task 4. So higher marks were awarded for students who showed good analytical and evaluative skills, particularly when they apply them to the development and improvement of their own knowledge, planning skills, and future practice. So also moving from simply describing or listing the changes to carrying out a more detailed analysis of them meant that the students were awarded higher marks. And understanding the requirements of command verbs for this task is mentioned here. So this might suggest that it include reflecting on the effectiveness of their communication skills, the quality of their approach, the ways in which the feedback they received changed their plan, and how they developed their own knowledge and skills to inform their future practice. Janet, I'm bringing you in now, please, to talk about the ESP overall.
Okay, thanks, Helen. I'm going to start with just reflecting on something you said at the beginning of this section, which was something around various assessment tasks involved, and that's critical for me. That's actually key to this whole thing. To be honest, that gives the familiarity for the students, the fact that they need to be prepared for the various assessment tasks involved. And yes, an appreciation of analysis and evaluation and reflection too. So the more familiar the students feel, the better prepared they will be. I think that goes hand in hand. But the skills required for the employer set project, I always talk about this, may not come as easily as first thought. I think we think about an exam and we sort of think, okay, let's prepare students, they're going to do an exam. but they're also going to do an employer set project. And in lots of ways, an exam is easier to contain in terms of we know what it looks and feels like, and we can prepare for that. The employer set project is quite innovative in its makeup and its characteristic, and it's been praised for that. However, some of those required skills don't come as easily as first thought, and they can be challenging, and just as challenging, and if not more challenging than an exam. So giving feedback, receiving feedback, being able to reflect, being able to use that information and form part of an analysis and evaluation are high level skills, so they are not sort of less demanding than an exam. So for me, it would be, yes, absolutely, we need to be familiar with the exam and what it might look and feel like and the different types of questions, but we need to be equally prepared for the different skills to be able to really maximize opportunity for a student to do as well as they should by applying those skills in these different conditions. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Janet. So I'm going to take you to the question now about the ESP. So the question, thank you, Molly, has come in. How are you wanting the students to reference feedback? Is this the student's initials who has provided the feedback, possibly? What's your thoughts, Janet?
I think as long as we've got feedback, and I know on one of the slides you mentioned about one of the points that was raised by the examiners in terms of making sure it was clear what the sort of amends had been, you know. So we've got an original, we've now got this feedback, we've now reflected on that, and we've made those amends, and we've got a finished product, if you like. And I think, you know, maybe a teacher authentication that has happened, but it's really, we're looking at the fact that this feedback's been received, and this is now the, you know, the way that I've amended it, and there's a given that this is happening under those supervised conditions, you know, so there is a given that that is happening. So whether that's actually been called for in the ESP guidelines, off the top of my head, I do not know. But if it feels safer to give some sort of teacher authentication, there would be nothing wrong with that equally.
Lovely, thank you. So just before we move on to the occupational specialisms, we're going to ask for your takeaways and related to the Chief Examiner's reports. I'm going to share a QR code again. I've put the Menti link into the chat. So choose the ones that resonate with you the most. So we've summarised the takeaways, if you like, and would like you to vote on which one you feel meets your needs the most. If you choose other, so I'm going to bring the poll over in a second. If you choose other, please tell us in the chat, question box, what you mean by that other. So this is the Menti poll you should see on the screen now. Yes, doing a double check and you can. So please, in the Menti link or using the QR code, please vote. You can see some people have started voting already. You can add your own votes in, but these are the options. We've got to do more general exam prep with the students, to provide more support for them to apply theory to practice, to develop their analytical skills. Do they need to practice their verbal communication skills? Do they need to work on proofreading their work? Do you need to remind them what the core elements are that they're being assessed on, or remind them of the 4 core skills? Do you need to ensure that they can show the depth and breadth of their knowledge? Do you need to help them and read the questions really carefully, or practice answering them? Lovely, thank you, people are voting, brilliant. To ensure that they link their answers to policies, etc. Or is it other? And as I say, if you choose other, please add them in the question box. So just from our summary from the ESP and exams Chief Examiner's reports, which resonates with you that you would benefit the most from applying in your future practice? I'm going to leave that open while we move on. I'm just aware that we haven't got a lot of time left to talk about the occupational specialisms. So as I say, I'm leaving that Menti poll open, and I'm going to hand over to Janet for the specialisms.
Okay, so when we think about these occupational specialisms and we're looking at the early years educator, assisting teaching, the requirements and expectations, thinking about the practical side of it, because these occupational specialisms, this is when that coherence of practice and theory are coming into their own, when we've got that deeper dive from the breadth of the core. And within that deeper dive, the practice is absolutely critical to bringing all of this together and contextualizing it within that specialism. So for both early years educator and assisting teaching, there is that practical requirement of assignment 2. And for early years, of course, this is the one occupational specialism assignment 2 part 1 that you're kind of dragging over into the first year. And that's where the students are building those competencies, where they're being observed in practice and where they're actually engaging in professional discussion. And all of those things are helping with the core skills and the other skills that we've been talking about, wider to develop that wider understanding. Where there have been obvious challenges, there have been obvious challenges around accessibility, but those things have improved dramatically. As sticking with the practical side of things and assignment 2, the other thing that we've got to be mindful of is the structured observations and about preparing employers for that as well, so that students feel that they are ready for their structured observations and assessments, and also that employers are tuned in to what those assessments are going to be like through that structured approach. And that's going to feel a little bit different because they're used to the assessor going in and having those holistic observations. Now it's got that little bit more of an assessment, true assessment feel to it. So it's about that educating the employee with that as well. Preparation is key, lots of practice involved in those structured observations, again, to master the that familiarity. And then assignment 1 and assignment 3 are very much again around that theory and practice. So assignment 1 is for the early years is very much around the planning, and likewise in assisting teaching, but it's obviously looking at more of a lesson plan within the given scenario, but it allows students to bring in all of the richness of their experiences from their placement, from their industry experience. And assignment 3 is very much around observation in the early years, and likewise about being able to identify, recognise and consider the requirements and expectations of a teaching assistant, for example, and looking at the needs and the sort of discrete needs of children and young people. So it will sort of expand out into welfare as well. So the requirements and the expectations here are very aligned to practical skill. So we are building on practical experiences, skills in the industry. As it says here, the what are we doing and why are we doing that? Child development is absolutely crucial. And understanding how that is fitted around the curriculum. The child must come first, the young person must come first, and then the curriculum is built around them. Provision. Where can you actually be employed in education and childcare? And of course, the knowledge, skills and behaviours. So we hear a lot about KSBs and the links that those have with the standard from the apprenticeship and the Trailblazer standard, the employer set standard for this industry. Thanks, Helen.
Great, thanks, Janet. Your insight and input is always so useful and valuable, so brilliant. So we're nearing the end of the session. So just another reminder, if you've got a question, we'll ask you to give us questions, but we're going to pose a question for you as well related to the content of today's session. What we'd like you to think about is how you're going to use your review of the first year or 2 years to inform your future teaching, learning and assessment practice. And you might consider a range of activities areas, and some or all of the points shown on the screen now. Obviously, this list is not exhaustive, and would expect every centre to individualise their review depending on the students' needs, the placement experiences, expectations, and availability, and the teacher's strengths and weaknesses as well. And as for any CPD activity, please consider what we've covered today and use the learning to inform your future practice. Just quickly encouraging you to ask questions in the question box, please, if you have any. I'm also going to run a quick poll to help you review your learning. And your choices are on the screen now. I'm going to launch the poll through GoToWebinar. Would like you to tell us, what will you do with today's session? How has it helped? How has it confirmed? Has it shocked? What's it done? Has it consolidated what you thought, when your ideas and your experiences? Have you learned loads which you maybe is going to take away and apply to your planning? Do you want to know more, and do you want to know how you can find out more? Or do you now know where you need to focus your future planning experiences, etc.? So please let us know how you feel about what we've talked about today. Lovely, the votes are coming in at the moment. We've got a bit of a split against has consolidated thoughts and ideas, brilliant. And sometimes that reassurance for a new qualification is more important than learning a lot. You know, it's, I know that what I'm doing, or I feel like what I'm doing is right for my students on this qual. And then we've also got the other half of the split at the moment is I've learned loads which I'm going to apply. So brilliant. I'm going to close that poll now and just give another few seconds in case anybody else would like to put their vote in. Okay, thank you so much. So I will check the question box again as well. Janet, is there anything else you want to say that I haven't given you the chance to yet?
I don't think so, Helen. It's been great to have the opportunity, really, to it's been reflective for me. It's a good experience to actually take stock of that examiner report, go through it, and to do so, you know, within this community of expert teachers and learning specialists, and to just think, okay, these are the critical steps within this assessment strategy, and to think about how students are faring with that. So really, really interesting and a really good reflective exercise. So thank you.
Brilliant. We do have another question. Thanks again. On behalf of a childcare team, wondering about the possibility of an exemplar ESP for early years or for AT. Are there any plans for exemplars?
One we
Do you
made
know?
earlier, so ones that a student has done. I don't think we've got any plans to do that, but I might be wrong. So I think that might be something we do have to take back to the assessment team just to double check. And it might be one for our best practice network as well, where we can actually have a discussion on expectation and standardization there against the employers, or the examiner's report. That would be an interesting debate, wouldn't it?
It would, and we are running a pilot of the network at the moment, but we have plans to expand it to all providers. So please keep an eye out for the invites if you're not already part of the best practice network. So brilliant, thank you. So we've reached the end of the session. Thanks again to Janet. As I say, your input is always insightful and brilliant. So thank you. I'm going to just quickly say there will be an evaluation form as you leave today's session. We'd also really ask you to share your ideas regarding future CPD activities that NCFE could provide or support you with. I'll let Janet say her final farewells before I close today.
Oh, okay, just to say thank you very much. Thanks to Helen and thanks to everybody for coming onto the webinar. Busy, busy days, so much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Once again, many thanks for everybody who attends today. We know how precious time is, especially in this window. So we do want this, we've got a live assessment window at the moment. So we do like your input on when we should and shouldn't do CPD and what you'd like from us. So as I say, any ideas we really, really do appreciate. We really like to use the session as the basis of your review in relation to developing your teaching, learning, assessment practice further. We are always here for you, Sarah, Janet and I, and we really enjoy working with you. So thanks ever so much. Please stay safe and well. And as again, thanks again from everybody at NCFE.